Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sensitivity Doctor. Do you ever feel like your compulsion to work, move, and go is bogging you down and making you feel burnt out? Well, this episode is for you. I talk with Annie Wright, who is a therapist who specializes in working with highly driven folks who need to figure out how to combat something called rest resistance. And this isn't just something that happens in the work avenue. We also talk about how things like trauma and also high sensitivity can impact our ability to rest. Annie was fabulous. She's so compassionate. She's so full of ideas. And I also cannot wait to read her book that's going to be coming out next year. I will definitely have to have her come back and chat about that. I hope each and every one of you finds a little piece of advice and something from this episode that helps you know that you deserve rest, you deserve peace, and you deserve to allow yourself to go slow in order to go fast. Enjoy. Annie, thank you for being here. Can you introduce yourself to our listeners and tell them a little bit about yourself and why you're passionate about the topic we're going to talk about today?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. Well, my name's Annie Wright, and I'm a licensed psychotherapist, very specifically a relational trauma recovery specialist. I'm a practicing clinician, but I also founded and run a pretty large therapy center, Evergreen Counseling in Berkeley, where I have a team of other trauma trained clinicians. I actually sold that company in January, but I'm still staying on as CEO.
Oh,
I'm
congrats.
also Thank you. I'm also a writer. My manuscript is due to Norton in the fall, and I teach and lead programming really designed around relational trauma recovery, very specifically for folks who are driven and ambitious and who coped with their relational trauma histories through work addiction, achievement, drive, right? And the reason why I'm so passionate about the topic, I mean, of course, my entire professional life is personal. It's my own story, and now I get to, on the other side of my healing, support those with resonant stories. But I think what I'm so passionate about when it comes to talking about rest resistance is for so many of us when we're young and we come from relational trauma histories where rest equaled danger or achievement was the only thing that gave us safety or validation or secured love from our attachment figures. The idea of slowing down, of being still, right, of sort of taking your foot off the gas pedal can feel enormously anxiety producing, scary hard, if not impossible. And yet, if we don't, we run the risk of killing the goose who lays the golden egg.
Right, right.
So, helping people develop a different relationship to rest, regulating their nervous system, and allowing themselves to actually feel good and take care of themselves. It's one of my favorite things to do when working with driven and ambitious folks from relational trauma histories.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to unpack rest resistance because I'm sure it looks different for all different people.
Sure.
So I would love if you could start with how you would describe rest resistance and how to tell the difference between I'm just really driven
Mm,
versus I struggle with actually resting.
right. Well, again, bearing in mind this is my subjective definition, I think rest resistance is feeling a compulsivity to keep moving, to keep working, and an overwhelming amount of anxiety when you imagine slowing down, stopping, being non productive, being non generative. And I think the primary difference between what might be considered a little bit more pathological or clinical is choice. It always boils down to choicefulness, I think. Um, when we're operating from a place of drive and passion and generativity for our work, which I completely identify with, I love what I do. We still we can be driven and we can be ambitious, but we can still find choice around, okay, that's enough for today. I got to take care of myself now. I got to get those 8 hours of sleep. And it feels easier to close the laptop. It feels easy to take a Sunday off to go to a field hockey practice and a potluck with the neighbors. Where if we're having a more pathological response, we might push ourselves beyond what's appropriate for our bodies. We might sacrifice having a life in order to zero out the inbox. So it really for me boils down to, do you feel a certain amount of choice around whether you do or don't rest and take some time off to take
Mhm.
care of yourself?
I like that distinction. And it's something I would imagine could be difficult for people who maybe have neurodiversity
Hmm.
to be able to piece apart and have I mean, it sounds like it takes a certain level of mindfulness to be able to do that.
Well, yes and no. And bearing in mind that neurodiversity is not my clinical area of expertise, what I am aware of, though, is that so many unresolved trauma symptoms can mask as potentially neurodivergent symptoms. So it always becomes a little clearer to me when I'm working with somebody through trauma recovery what is or is not potentially related to neurodiversity versus, lingering trauma symptom.
Right.
Um, but tell me a little bit more what you mean by that, and I can speak to it a little bit more clearly.
Sure. And I really appreciate one of my favorite things about talking to people who I think are the most interesting and the most knowledgeable is that they're also the first ones to be able to say, I don't know.
Oh, well, I will
And so
always, yeah.
I really appreciate your honesty.
Oh,
So I guess the way I look at it would be, and this is just based on my work and who I've worked with,
hmm,
is first and foremost the etiology. So where did it start, right? Is
right.
this something that came as a response to something like trauma? Or is this a bit more of an ingrained response that has been present in some way or another much of our life? So that's
Hmm.
one part of it when I think about the distinction. But I guess I would decipher it between the experience of racing thoughts and
Mm,
the seek for dopamine input that maybe someone with ADHD might have,
mm,
where they like novelty and they like to be involved in things and keep the train moving because
yeah,
it actually calms their nervous system in a weird
yeah,
contradictory way,
yeah.
versus more of like flight mode, which we
Uh-huh.
know is more a trauma response that
Right.
might be more centered around I need to keep moving so I stay safe.
Yeah, I love this conversation. I'm going to add another nuance to it because I think it's
Please.
important. And it's something I'm learning more and more about, particularly for folks. Well, I'm learning more about the subtype of high sensitivity, where those folks are also high sensate seeking,
Right.
right? And I actually identify as that highly sensitive but high sensate seeking. And so I do think I think it would be reductive to say, well, if you're experiencing this, then it must be that, right? Because we do have to be mindful of pulling all these pieces apart. The etymology, as you mentioned, the origins of what is the nervous system doing, even as we're seeking out that stimulus, right? And again, do you feel at choice around stopping the seeking? How is your nervous system doing? And also, how does your nervous system actually respond when and if you choicefully slow down, or sometimes are even forced to, right? Maternity leave is an example I always think about, or an injury, an athletic injury that puts lays you out flat. So much of my understanding of my clients and how rest resistance might show up for them comes actually when it's forced upon them, right? So what's also tricky, what's also really tricky sometimes is the bulk of my clients work in Silicon Valley. And
Okay.
there, it's not just an internally generated compulsivity to work, but rather you're surrounded by a culture that rewards quote unquote heroic hours, where 80, 90 hours are the
Oh my
norms.
gosh.
Mhm, absolutely. Well, and it's a lot like working in big corporate law too. You've got
Right.
not only your own internal stuff, which might be playing into this, but the culture around you says, aha, keep going, work more. You're as good
Yeah.
as your billable rates. We need you to hit these hours, right? You need to shift this, work all night. So it becomes really tricky to tease apart for folks, particularly if they're in those environments as well.
Yeah. No, I could definitely see that. It's funny because even someone who I have, and now I'm sitting here trying to think, do I have rest resistance or do I not? Because
Heard.
when I'm resting, I do enjoy it, but it almost feels like I feel better able to rest if I have been productive first. So, what are your
Well,
thoughts around that? Like,
my
it's
thoughts
like do
are,
your chores before you enjoy, like, kind of that kind of
yes,
energy.
I know. Well, I think my thoughts are that I would ask more questions about that, right? Where that belief from, where the discomfort stems from, if the chores aren't done, right? If all the dishes aren't cleared away, what comes up inside of us? Where did we learn early on that completing chores equals we earn our rest by completing chores, right? I think that's common for so many of us. And of course, I'm listening to myself because I also tell my daughter, well, no, we can't play in the morning until the bed's made, right? And until the, you know,
Right? So it's like, where are these messages coming from?
and so again, and we want to be nuanced about it too, right? A
Right.
certain amount of life does require us to do things in order to move life along. So I wouldn't ever say, clearly you have rest resistance. I would want to unpack it in a more nuanced way.
Right. Well, it makes me think of how this can show up differently, maybe for high sensation seeking or highly sensitives, because I think one of my drivers of getting the chores done before rest is that if I don't, my very active limbic system is scanning, and this is maybe a little bit of like maybe of an ADHD energy too, but scanning or viewing or assessing like what needs to be put away. It's almost like when there's too much noise and too much input, it makes it harder to rest.
Oh, I absolutely agree with you. I'm terribly impacted by my environment, and I keep my home. I mean, it practically looks like a minimalist spa, and like my child. I mean, it can't live like that all the time. I have a 6-year-old. But I will also own to the fact that if I'm going to sit on my like corner of the couch with my Kindle and disappear into the Sarah J. Maas verse with my latest book, I can do so more easily if I don't see clutter all around me, because that's distracting, and it's not as pleasant to look at, right? So again, we want to also be mindful. Can we still tolerate it even if that's not done? Does it feel intolerable? Does it feel preferable or intolerable? Right. And so that's where I start to gauge what might be going on for folks, what stories we've attached to it. And I want to be mindful. That's a really subtle way, I think, of rest resistance showing up. The ability to even sit down with a book is not something that people who are actively compulsively workaholic for compulsively resisting rest are even, close to or touching. Usually a franticness, a constant being in motion that doesn't even let you experiment with that moment on the couch. And that's kind of at the
Gotcha.
clear end of the spectrum. But
Right.
I love where you and I are at and like being curious about that.
So for those who do fall on the other end of the spectrum where they really truly are struggling, what are
Mm.
some of the symptoms and or consequences that you see,
Oh
maybe
gosh.
physically and mentally?
Well, sure, sure. So, what are the symptoms of almost pathological rest resistance? Huge amounts of anxiety that show up when you think about taking time off, constant rumination about how far behind you might be professionally if you do actually take Sunday off and just chill with your neighbors. There's a real degree of discomfort physically, emotionally, and mentally when you do. What are the consequences of that? Well, I think you know as well as I do, all of the symptoms of burnout, all the symptoms, right? We can only push ourselves so much without taking care of the body, without giving ourselves the biopsychosocial basics. So there's a high risk for burnout. A high risk, too, I find, for continued anxiety and depression, a postponement of any relational trauma recovery work that might be begging our attention, somatic signals that can range from constant tension to insomnia, jaw clenching. When we don't take care of our bodies and minds, and I would say souls, it's it's unsustainable.
Right.
It's when we start to get into the position of killing the goose that lays the golden egg.
And how would you define burnout? Because I know it's a word we all use often, but I think sometimes people struggle to know, is this burnout or am I just tired today? And I'll just throw this out there too. I once read a study about how burnout doesn't only take that day or that week. Sometimes it can take months to years to recover from, which blew my
Exactly.
mind.
Exactly. 100%. So I think it's really important. Again, we're speaking in nuance here. Burnout, like so many other things, exists on a spectrum, right? You can come through a really big work project to ship something, right? And that's so common in Silicon Valley, like those massive work sprints. And then be like, oh my God, I need to take a week of vacation and like catch up on sleep and bank it up, right? But you can come back and feel a little bit more refreshed. So it can be more episodic or it can be completely ongoing. I think of all the extraordinary female physicians I worked with who worked 7 days a week through COVID, right? And then they weren't doing that. They weren't resting because of intrusive dreams, or they were having to mom on top of that work. And they perpetuated that, how shall we say, pace for years. And by the time they were done, severe depression, peak anxiety, somatic signals that were putting them at the risk of cardiac incidents and profound migraines and digestive issues. So again, burnout can really run a spectrum. And I think when people get to that severe end of the spectrum, exactly what you said, it can take years to unwind the damage to the nervous system and to our soma, to our body. I've worked for clients who've been in that position. It's long-term recovery work, right?
Right.
And my hope is always that people, when burnout starts to whisper, they hear it whisper. And then when it starts to shout, they got paying attention because you don't want to get hit by the dump truck message, right?
Right.
That's your burnout.
And there was one other thing that I had once read about burnout that struck me, and it was very different than some of those kind of more aggravated and positive meaning like kind of the obvious symptoms like you're saying that we can feel and touch, like heart rate and tension. It was that when we are in a state of burnout, and I'm really curious your thoughts on this, that when we may know that we are approaching burnout or we are in a state of burnout, when we do two different things mentally. One, we start to doubt our proficiency in something
Yes,
to an
certainly.
extreme. And
Yeah.
number two, we start to feel, I guess resentful is a little bit reductive, but we can feel some almost apathy or resentment or just a real dislike for something that maybe we normally would have loved. And I mean, you can even think
Sure.
of
Sure.
like parenthood, for example,
Oh,
could be an example of this.
definitely. Definitely. Yeah, thank you for speaking to this because I guess this falls into the camp of biopsychosocial impacts, but your relationship to yourself, to others, to the world, and to the work itself, right? I want to be mindful. Burnout doesn't just happen in the professional context. It can absolutely happen with caregiving, whether it's caregiving children or caregiving aging adults. So I want to be mindful it's
Right.
in the professional
Anytime
space.
we're like giving our energy out.
Correct, right, to whatever
Right.
application it is. And absolutely, our relationship to that act, to that content area can change pretty dramatically. Um, Apathy and self-doubt, maybe on the lower end of the spectrum, to outright hatred of, right? I've worked with plenty of people who, early on felt an incredible sense of mission and a sense of being energized from their work, deeply loving it. And they can veer all the way to absolutely hating it and wanting to throw away their entire professional path because of severe burnout. So the way we relate to the content or the sector can often change as well as the side of burnout. And we don't want to get to that point.
No, no. And so, for anyone listening who does
Right.
feel like they relate to some of the symptoms you're talking about, or is constantly scanning and thinking, I shouldn't be. And you know what? That's something we didn't talk about yet that we should touch
Yeah,
on before we dive into how do we deal with this?
sure.
Guilt.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
That
Yeah.
is something I hear so often with clients that I work with who feel like they have to constantly be going, is that guilt soundtrack is so intense for when they are in a state of rest or when they're not producing. How would you suggest someone interact with guilt that they experience over rest?
Well, I always lead with a little bit of psychoeducation. Guilt is an emotion that says, I've done something bad. Shame is an emotion that says, I am bad, right? Like me, my person. But guilt always says, I've done something bad. So then we start to unpack it. Where did you learn that resting was bad? Where did you learn that slowing down? Where did you learn that not doing all the chores before you rest is bad, right? We start to get curious about the origins of those maladaptive beliefs. Um, Not because it's going to solve everything, but so we can create a little bit more flexibility in the thinking, right? Just because her mom never sat down and, she was actually quite depressed and anxious and hated her life and was bitter about parenting. Do you want that outcome too? Right? Is that connected to that outcome? We start to create a little more mental flexibility to see if we can reduce the way we feel guilty about resting or taking time off, etc. So that's certainly one tool that I employ. I mean, we're already talking about, well, how do you work with this? What do you
Right.
do? Right? And that's a piece of it, exploring the origins, the genesis of any maladaptive beliefs or behaviors. We're always going back to the proverbial psychological basement, getting curious about these things. And then honestly, I employ a lot of tools with my clients. I help them lean into the imagining of, well, what's the cost of this going to be if we don't change this? What's the cost already? How could the cost amplify, right? And then, I use whatever leverage points are available, their relationship to their children, right? Their health scares, and honestly, the love of the career they're attempting so valiantly to be in. Because again, it's the third time I've mentioned it, right? I'll always bring up the parable of the goose that lays the golden egg, right? If we sacrifice the goose for short-term gains, we end up, as the story goes, killing the goose entirely. And if we want to have long, beautiful careers, we need to operate sustainably. The human
Right.
body or mind cannot go indefinitely without rest consistently. So, and then in terms of behavioral interventions, oh boy, so many. I'll start with micro practices for my clients. Just,
Okay.
well, in the same way that we might encourage people not
No,
to.
I like the terminology you're using for it.
Good, good,
Yeah.
yes. In the same way we don't, tell someone who's been a couch potato, go run a marathon tomorrow.
Right,
Like
exactly.
no, you're terrible advice, right? Or, if you've never meditated, probably don't set the bar of an hour for yourself.
Right.
If you have a tremendous amount of anxiety that comes up when you imagine resting, we're not going to start with you taking a whole Sunday off. Like, can you sign off at 2 p.m.? Can you sign off at 3 p.m.? Can you give yourself like, downtime after 4, right? We're going to start with something a little smaller, a little bit more tolerable. Um, can you complete your clinical notes within 48 hours versus 2? Can you sit down on the couch for 5 minutes? And
Even,
honestly, I'll
yes.
also titrate into the rest for a lot of people. I'll to make it more tolerable. Um, Instead of doing your chores, unloading and loading the dishwasher, prepping dinner, getting the lunchbox ready for tomorrow, and listening to another training, right? Or listening to another like
Have you been in my kitchen before?
I like show me a driven and ambitious woman who doesn't have the same content. I'll say, of course, like life is lifey. We still have to get the kids' lunchbox ready, but practicing more rest and we're easing ourselves into it. Can you listen to a fiction book on Audible? Can we make it
Right.
not personal growth oriented? We find
Love
slow
that.
ways. Yeah, we find slow ways of titrating in. I always use gym analogies. I love working out. So I always use gym analogies. It's like, we're not going to start with the 40-pound weights. We're going to start with the little pounds and we'll build up the tolerance, right? And in the meantime, when the anxiety and the discomfort surfaces, or the depression or the grief or whatever, really, I should say, when we start practicing titrated rest, we pay attention to what comes up because it could be anxiety, or it could be grief, or it could be fear, or it could be awareness that my marriage really sucks, or, parenting
Yeah.
isn't that fun. We pay
Mhm.
attention to what comes up and then we work with that therapeutically because the more we do, the easier and more tolerable rest may become. Right. It can be complicated and long-term work, but I always believe in psychoeducation, right? Identifying the genesis of the beliefs and behaviors, and then working in a really titrated, tolerable way.
I really like that because, to your point, if you go from never doing something or rarely doing something to doing all of it, your nervous
Mhm.
system may just completely check out
Correct.
or it may never acclimate. Like we need to ease into it. And so I like the thought of slowly titrating
Mhm.
into rest.
Mhm.
And you said something earlier. I just wanted to make sure to kind of comment on real quickly about the origin of where these narratives come from. I think often we have a notion that they come from negative experiences, but I think sometimes they can also come from affirming experiences
Sure. Sure.
that are
Yeah.
like these
Yeah.
shining stars that we
Yeah.
look at
Sure.
amongst maybe a potentially negative experience. So we start to like equate,
Yeah.
oh, that time that I was achieving, I was getting
Yeah, yeah,
affirmation.
totally, totally, right? I appreciate that nuance because it's not just, oh, I would sit down on the couch and dad would come smack me and tell me I'm a terrible person. It can also be because you earn praise, like, oh, mommy's little helper, look at you, you're such a good girl. And like maybe you earned praise that way, right? And also, you know, we also bring things from outside the home to our relationship with, getting all the chores done, of course, right? Like the way into one thing is the way into many things. If we learned that constantly achieving was what gave us safety, validation, praise, a sense of belonging, right? That sort of patterning around go, go, go can extrapolate to so many different areas, right? So when we're working with rest resistance, we're not just talking about, well, can you sit on your couch with a Kindle? We're gonna be finding that it looks, it can extrapolate out to many different sectors of one's life, right? How we vacation, right? How we work, so many different things.
And I like this too because I think if we can think of the way that the mommy's little helper, that was such a good way to put it, or, getting the affirmations, I can see that being where and why maybe highly sensitive people
Mm.
may sometimes become more prone to rest resistance because
Mm.
HSPs are so intuitively connected to how others are feeling. So if they're in an environment, say growing up where everything feels chaotic, but whenever they achieve, they take the burden off their parents, they know that when they achieve, everyone feels better.
Absolutely. I mean, it's another way of absorbing safety, validation, praise. I mean, of course, people who are more sensitive to dynamics and picking up on the emotional cues of others, yeah, I think that can be doubly reinforcing in so many ways. And then I'll also just double click on this point
Yeah.
around many of us who identify as highly sensitive really do like clean places. And we
Yes, we
do like
do.
like a certain amount of order and tidiness in order to, feel okay in our system. So I'll raise my hand to that one as well.
It's really funny. I almost did like a mini case study in my own practice because there are, I want to say, there's 8 rooms. I love that I had to count that, but there's 8 rooms, and a couple of them have therapists that kind of share. That's why it took me a second. I can walk into each room and somewhat determine who the HSP therapists are. And one meeting, we do like a monthly meeting where we'll talk about clients, but then I'll do little trainings if we have
Sure.
the time. We all did the HSP scale,
Mm.
and I was spot on. Like all
Oh,
their rooms match, and
mm,
it's not that they're not messy, but it's like the non HSPs. I'd walk in and maybe a blanket would be strewn or something, just something so innocent and innocuous. But I'm thinking when you go in mine, it's like everything's like put back before I
mhm.
leave, and
Oh,
it's just
no.
so funny.
Yeah, it's like tell me you're an HSP without telling me you're an HSP. Let me take a
Absolutely.
look at your relationship to the magic art of tidying up or whatever. It's like we're gonna tidy. Yeah, I totally
Yes.
identify.
Can I ask you personally with the high sensation seeking? How
Yes.
do you, because you're, well, first and foremost, I'd love to know how that shows up for you, and in what ways you like it, and maybe what ways it causes some, issues at times. But because you're so knowledgeable about rest resistance and it's something you work on,
Mhm.
and you're a high sensation seeker, like how do you
Yeah.
balance that?
Whew. Well, I want to be really mindful and honest that I'm still in recovery from my workaholism, and I'm
Mm,
only now just getting to know this aspect of me and separating it out from anything that might have been pathologically driven.
mm-hmm.
Um, but I mean, you could just read my bio to see what I've accomplished by 43 to be like, okay, that's a lot, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not satisfied with one thing, right? I'm both a clinician who loves really deep, intense clinical work, but I scaled a multi-million dollar company and launched it with a 3-month-old. I mean, like, who does that, right? I like to author and teach and speak at national conferences. So I like a wide diversity, and I tend to run towards the challenges, right? And even the way that I vacation, right? I'm not going to Hawaii and sitting by a pool. I'm riding camels in the Sahara with my 4-month old or my 4-year-old on Christmas Eve.
I'm like 4 month old. Wow.
No, but I was 1 month into my company at that point. So when she was 4,
You
post-COVID,
had
we got
you had
changed.
a baby. It was
I
a
had
baby, just not the baby. It was the company
a
baby.
little brave. I know now that she's 6, I'm like, oh, 4 was so young.
Oh.
Um, so it's more like I'm not one of those classic like skydive or diving with sharks or oh no anything that sort of feels completely overwhelming to my nervous system or really has moral impairment attached to it. No, but I will do slightly edgy things, right? Just to feel more myself, to feel more myself. Signing up for a 10K. I love challenge. I love feeling like I can push up against something. At the same time,
Right.
downtime. I need to be at home by 7 o'clock to have that wind downtime. I need my clean, tidy house. I need my routines. So it's a balance of all of it, right? Creating a really robustly supportive daily life, and within it, a certain amount of diversity and stimulation, but in tolerable amounts. So
Right.
that's how I'm learning to work with it right now.
That's a good way to describe it. I would say I metaphorically heard someone say once that being a high sensation seeking HSP is like driving a car where one foot's on the brake and one foot's on the gas at all times. Like you're never both. It's like one or the other.
I'm laughing so much because I'm learning what brake means for me now. I used to just be the gas pedal. I think I've learned a lot from, and my daughter is high sensate seeking and highly sensitive. So you can guess what our household is like in terms of high degrees of emotions.
It's like here and then everyone's quiet.
It is so much. But my husband is very much like a brake over a gas kind of guy. And so over the years, we've learned so much from each other, kind of meeting a little bit more in the middle. And certainly, the more that I've attempted to recover from my workaholism and using achievement as my kind of last lingering relational trauma symptom. I am learning that you cannot drive a very fancy sports car on highway and not put gas into it. I like driving on the highway. The car needs gas. You need to,
Absolutely.
right? So, for me, learning how to put my foot on the gas, the brake, right? Learning how to rest, has been really exciting because I can see the car going much further in terms of distance, many
I
more
love
events.
that.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned your husband, and it makes me think of just relationships in general when it comes to healing
Yeah.
rest, that relationship we have with rest. I'm
Huh.
wondering if you believe, are there any ways that our relationships inform our way to rest?
Oh, 100%. 100%. My husband and I have been together for 14 years. We met and fell in love when we were both living and working at Esalen. We were 26 and 28. So we've really grown up together. And both of us come from relational trauma histories. And I always joke that we were like, I mean, literally, you cannot find two people more different. I mean, everyone was shocked when we got together. Um, but we have what each other lacks. And one of the things I lacked was an ability to be still and believe I deserved rest. And my husband loves nothing more than tucking me into that corner of the couch, right? And building a fire in the wood stove while the snow comes down on a Maine winter, making me bacon and encouraging me to take that rest. So if I had somebody who likewise struggled with their own compulsivity with work or inability to slow down, I don't think I'd be as far along in my own work as I would be. We've been really good for each other in that sense. Not about our problems in other areas, but yeah, a wonderful healing agent for me.
Do you have any suggestion if someone's listening and they're in a relationship like that you described where both people are struggling?
Yeah. Open communication about it as a topic, open communication about your desire to do something different. invitation for them to co-participate with you in those micro rests, those titrations. If they're in therapy, I always get curious. Oh, if you reflect this back to your partner, do you think they'll bring it to therapy? That'd be so interesting, right? Asking in a really collaborative way, would you like to join? Would you like to practice together? And if the answer is no, there is a certain amount of tolerating discomfort that is probably going to happen, right? And hopefully a commitment to still doing your work yourself. Because also one of the most powerful things, right, when two people struggle with the same thing, is the modeling that you can do, right? The modeling of what it looks and feels like for you if you take a little bit better care of yourself, etc. So even if the person isn't willing to do the work up front, staying true to what you know to be best and right and true for you, and hopefully modeling something that inspires them when they're ready.
I really love that because I think it, like to your point, if you're spending the energy and the time caring for yourself, then wonderful, yourself is being cared for. And also, you're not, and I think this is important for HSPs and sensitives and empaths and people who have experienced trauma who are used to absorbing. Well, if you're not taking care of your time and your need to rest, then me doing that is not something that should be a priority either. So by doing what you're doing instead, where there's the invitation, and if it's not taken up, you can look at it as modeling. I would hope that anyone listening could get to the point where they don't even have to think of it as modeling. They just do it because it feels good for them. And they
Sure.
know that no one else needs to be involved in that. And I've noticed that with people I work with who have a lot of relational trauma, who struggle to just take care of themselves purely because they deserve it, they struggle more unless we assign kind of an outside source of attachment or love, like I'm going to do this for my children or I'm going to do this
Right.
for.
Right. That's one of the leverage points I was talking about earlier, right? I think for so many people, the belief that I deserve, I'm worthy of, um, it's often not there. And I always think of it as like, we have to scaffold around it. We have to like put those tiny little layers of pearl around even a grain of sand. And often that grain of sand isn't necessarily, well, I am worthy and I should take care of the little girl inside, but it's the externalization like, oh, what do I want my daughter to see? Right.
Right.
Or, or even like again, like I said, like the incentivizing of career or whatever, right? So we start with whatever desire might be there, whatever reason might be there to do this hard work, and then we build upon it, hopefully getting to the point where people are like, oh, honestly, I deserve this. Like, and I want to take good care of my little girl inside, and I'm worthy and deserving of, right? Eventually, we
Right.
hopefully get to that, but I completely agree with you. That's a pretty big leap for somebody who has spent their life self-hating or being hated by or having absolutely no esteem or confidence or regulation skills.
Couldn't agree more. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Annie, this was such a great conversation. I really appreciate it. I love it because I think it speaks to so many different types of people who maybe have rest resistance for different reasons. And I'm curious, we covered so many different ways you can look at it, what you can do to cope with it. If someone listening today is thinking, okay, I'm going to deal with rest resistance, I'm going to titrate rest, is there
Yeah.
any last thing, a way of thinking, I don't know, a mantra, something that you want to give them to leave
Sure.
with today?
I think the analogy of the gym can be really fruitful to think about. And also just the mantra, go slow to go fast, right? You do it in the gym, right? You
Oh,
don't
I
want to
like
carry.
that.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And we talk about it in business building as well, right? Slow to go fast down the road. You build really sustainable structures brick by brick so it can really last. You build up your endurance slowly so you don't, take yourself out and then have to be out of training for 2 months. As you're starting this process, the titration is so darn important and in ways that feel tolerable so you don't eclipse and overwhelm your nervous system. Just bear in mind, go slow to go fast, and it's going to be uncomfortable, and just anticipate that, right? But what I always tell my clients too, no challenge, no change. So
Oh, I
expect
like that.
the challenge to come up on the way to change.
I love that. Go slow to go fast. I'm going to remember that. Well, thank you
Great.
so much, Annie. If anyone wants to find you and continue learning alongside you, where can they look for you?
Absolutely. I'm pretty easy to find at anniewright.com. You can find all of my work there, ways to work with me, ways to take my programming, ways to get on my newsletter, and a lot about rest resistance. So I'd love
Awesome.
to have people come there and see what resonates with them there.
Great. Well, maybe we can envision them curling up on a couch with their little,
Great.
just get into a state of rest and then go explore Annie.
Totally. I titrate it, a little personal growth work with a little physical rest.
Yes, for sure.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I hope everyone enjoyed the chat and be well, everyone.